Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to unpack the fascinating and, let's be honest, sometimes completely frustrating global oil market, all to understand exactly what drives that price you end up paying at the pump. Look, whether you're commuting every day or just keeping half an eye on the news, you've definitely noticed that oil prices seem to have a mind of their own. So we're going to break down the actual facts and figures today to see how this massive, interconnected system really works.
Okay, let's just get right to the elephant in the room. The exact question pretty much every consumer wonders while they're standing there filling up their tank. We hear it all the time, right? If the US is this massive, top-tier oil producer, why do we still see prices violently spike at our local gas stations? It feels like a total disconnect. Well, to figure out why this happens, we kind of have to start at the very beginning of the supply chain. So Section 1, Anatomy of a Barrel. What are we actually pricing here? You hear it on the news constantly, right? Oil is at 80 bucks a barrel or $100 a barrel. But what exactly is a barrel? Well, the actual physical wooden barrels are totally gone today. But this quirky 42-gallon measurement, it's stuck around forever. Back in the 1860s, during the Pennsylvania oil boom, producers just used whatever old barrels they had laying around to store crude. We're talking upcycled whiskey barrels. But because they weren't all the exact same size, the industry eventually standardized the volume at exactly 42 gallons, just to make things fair. It's crazy to think about, but our highly advanced global energy market is literally still tied to 19th century whiskey barrels. And because of this, when you hear oil is $100 a barrel, you aren't just paying for gas. You're paying for a massive, interconnected system of products. Sure, gasoline absolutely makes up the largest share of what comes out of that 42-gallon barrel, but it's far from the only thing. That exact same barrel gets refined into diesel for transport trucks, jet fuel for airplanes, and heating oil for our homes. Even beyond fuel, it provides the fundamental building blocks for plastics, fertilizers, and countless chemicals we rely on every single day. One barrel does a whole lot of heavy lifting. All right, let's move on to Section 2, how oil is priced and the invisible mechanisms behind it. Because just knowing what a barrel is doesn't quite explain that wild price tag. First off, we've got to look at the sheer mind-boggling demand. Globally, we consume 104 million barrels of oil every single day. Here in the US, we use about 21 million barrels a day, which works out to roughly 7.5 billion barrels a year. That scale is just staggering. But here's something that might surprise you. US usage has actually remained relatively steady for decades, even as our economy and our population have grown. But while US consumption is remarkably steady, history shows us that oil prices are absolutely not. They are wildly volatile. You can see major spikes and drops directly tied to global events. Like in the 1970s, the Iranian Revolution caused massive price spikes. Then, flash forward to 2008, the global financial crisis caused demand to just heavily drop off. In 2020, COVID-19 triggered an unprecedented total collapse in demand. And more recently, from 2022 to the present day, geopolitical tensions involving Iran have driven some of the biggest price spikes we've seen in years. The price moves so much because it's incredibly sensitive to what's happening globally. So, who exactly is setting this constantly moving price? Well, there's no single who. Instead, prices are set by global benchmarks. You'll hear these acronyms a lot on financial news. WTI, that's West Texas Intermediate, is the main benchmark for oil produced right here in the US. Then you've got Brent crude, which serves as the global benchmark. And just to give you a true sense of the volatility we were just talking about, Brent crude has swung from under 20 bucks a barrel to well over 100 bucks a barrel. And where do these benchmark prices actually come from? They're set on giant digital marketplaces like the New York Mercantile Exchange, NMIX, and the Intercontinental Exchange, or ICE. But here's a wild twist. Actually, scratch that. It makes total sense when you think about it. The buyers and sellers on these exchanges aren't passing physical barrels of crude back and forth. They are trading futures contracts. These are binding agreements to buy or sell oil at a set price at a specific time in the future. So these benchmark prices are really determined by traders betting on what the future looks like, not by people physically trading liquid crude in a warehouse somewhere. But remember, crude is just the raw material. It's step one. Let's look at Section 3, from crude to pump, and all those hidden costs. Okay, look at this, because this is a crucial disconnect. When you look at the price on the big sign at your local gas station, only about 50% of what you're paying is actually tied to the price of the crude oil itself. It's roughly a 1-to-1 split. Half is the crude, and the other half is something entirely different. This explains why gas prices don't always perfectly mirror the crude prices you see moving on the news. This means your gas prices can absolutely rise or fall independently of the global crude market. That other 50% is all real-world logistics. You've got to pay for the refining process to turn that raw crude into gasoline. If there are capacity limits or refinery bottlenecks, boom, prices go up. You also have transportation logistics to get the fuel to the station. Add in government regulations, strict fuel standards, and seasonal demand shifts like the busy summer road trip season, and you get the whole picture. Gas prices can easily spike just because of a local refinery issue, even if global crude oil prices remain perfectly flat. Which brings us to a major point of confusion for American consumers. Section 4, the U.S. oil paradox. We're a top producer, yet we're still importing.
So the US is currently one of the world's top oil producers. But to get how we arrived here, we need a super quick history lesson. Back in 1975, Congress banned almost all exports of US crude oil. For a long time, it wasn't a big deal because we just weren't producing enough to export anyway. But then, from 2009 to 2015, incredible advancements in drilling technologies caused US crude production to roughly double. Recognizing this massive shift, Congress officially repealed that 40-year-old export ban at the end of 2015. Suddenly, our exports skyrocketed and imports dropped. Which brings us right back to our central paradox. If we're producing so much oil right here at home, why on earth are we still importing petroleum from other countries? Make it make sense, right? It seems totally crazy that a top-tier producer would still be actively buying from foreign markets. Well, the answer comes down to infrastructure. It's essentially a giant puzzle where the pieces don't perfectly fit. Not all oil is the same, and not all refineries can handle every type of oil. The massive amounts of oil the U.S. produces today is primarily what's known as light crude. But a huge chunk of our older U.S. refinery infrastructure was historically designed and built specifically to process heavy crude. So we basically end up exporting a lot of the light crude we drill to countries that can process it, while importing the heavy crude that our specific domestic refineries were built to handle. And that leads to this final major concept. You are permanently tied to global prices, no matter how much oil is resting under American soil. Whether a barrel is imported or exported, it's all priced on a global scale. Why? Because producers, just like any rational business, are always going to sell their product to whoever writes the biggest check. If the price of oil is higher in Europe or Asia, that is exactly where the oil goes. You are competing with buyers all over the planet every single day. And that brings us to our final stop, Section 5, Global Choke Points and the Incredible Vulnerability of Supply. Because oil is a truly global market, local prices are incredibly vulnerable to distant geography. A problem thousands of miles away can hit your wallet within days. 20 million. Let that number sink in for a second. That is the staggering number of barrels passing through a single narrow waterway called the Strait of Hormuz every single day in 2025. To put that in perspective, the Strait of Hormuz connects the Persian Gulf to the open ocean, and it acts as one of the most important geographic choke points in the entire world. Handling 20 million barrels a day means this one narrow stretch of water is facilitating roughly 1/5 of the entire world's oil consumption. Now, most of that oil doesn't even come to the US. It goes primarily to Asia. But here's why this matters directly to you. If a geopolitical event threatens the supply moving through this tiny choke point, it instantly drives up the global benchmark price. And because we're part of that interconnected market, a threat in the Strait of Hormuz means your price at the local gas pump goes up too. So the next time you see gas prices suddenly jump on the big sign down the street, just remember the incredible journey of that 42-gallon barrel. It leaves us with one final thing to ponder. When you pay at the pump, are you just buying local fuel, or are you paying the toll for a deeply interconnected global system shaped by markets, infrastructure, and world events?